好，好，我先走了啊，拜
All
拜。
right, we'll see you again. Right. So I
嗯
believe Minglei already asked you about the issue of Hong Kong. So I will tend to the topics I'm interested in about the digital decoupling. We can
嗯
see that Donald J. Trump just issued an executive order to ban some of the mobile application, including TikTok. And this morning is about WeChat. Now we are using that. So, so it makes a lot of Chinese concern, and also a lot of digital companies, they feel unsafe in this market. Because Donald Trump used that excuse to say, actually, this application will leak the information to pass the information to the government of China. Do you think they already have the real threat to the freedom and security of information in US? And also, if it's on the contrary, it breached the fair play rule in the market. Which side do you support?
I think that the US is cracking down on all Chinese technology at the moment, and that this is part of the new Cold War, which Donald Trump's administration is starting against China. There's no evidence that Huawei, for example, has been involved in sharing people's data with the Chinese government. Even the British government was not able to claim that there was any evidence that Huawei had ever done this. On the contrary, there's plenty of evidence that Google, Facebook have shared huge amounts of information with the US government, but nobody has used this as an excuse to ban those companies. So I think that this attack is based on US fear of Chinese technological development. In recent years, China has become a serious rival to the United States, not just in the size of its economy, but as a world leader in high-tech fields. And this is obviously part of the Made in China 2025 initiative that the Chinese government has supported. We'll see the 14th five-year plan will be announced later this year, and that will presumably tell us more about China's plans for high-tech development. But the United States, in my opinion, the United States is very nervous about losing its technological edge over China. And because it doesn't feel that it can compete fairly, it is resorting to very crude methods at the moment, trying to force other countries not to use Chinese technology. It's quite reminiscent of the way in the 19th century in the British Empire, Britain would not allow its colonies to trade with German or American companies. They had to only trade with British companies. And so America is now trying to force a similar shift away from reliance on Chinese tech. But in the United States, my understanding is that, for example, Huawei smartphones are not very common in the United States. So the impact of measures like banning Huawei from using Google Maps, for example, in the US would not be huge. But if the United States is able to put pressure on its allies to behave in a similar fashion, as we saw with the British government's U-turn on Huawei, then that could be much more serious, because millions of British people have Huawei smartphones. It's the third most popular smartphone maker in the UK. So you would start to see huge numbers of citizens put at great inconvenience by a US trade war against China.
Mm-hmm. So, so at least from the procedure, if a government or the other counterpart want to say you have any threat or security problem, you need to provide the evidence. So far, they haven't found any yet.
Yes, there's been no evidence presented by the Trump administration against TikTok, against WeChat, against any of these companies that they're targeting. And the context of the hysterical attacks on China that the Trump administration has been pushing with its conspiracy theories about China inventing coronavirus and spreading coronavirus deliberately to attack other countries' economies. This is really crazy talk from the President of the United States. In this context, we can't rely on the Secretary of State's word for it that these companies are a security threat. We should be asking him to demonstrate what evidence he's basing that on. And he hasn't presented any evidence of this at all.
Mm-hmm. We can tell the difference from the treatment from Donald Trump to WeChat and TikTok. For WeChat, he just say they need to ban straightforward. But for TikTok, they allow 45 days. Why do you think it caused that difference? Is it because the TikTok has more users in US and WeChat only for mainly for Chinese community?
I think that's exactly right. I think most people in the US, I mean, I'm obviously in the UK, so I'm not speaking from direct experience, but TikTok is very popular among children, among young adults. It's very widely used in Britain and America, and WeChat is not very common among non-Chinese people. So he would be taking a bigger political risk in immediately banning TikTok. It's also the case that a number of US lawyers have said that there is no legal basis for banning TikTok. So actually, they're doubting that the Trump government will be able to do this. So I think at the moment, he's pushing the TikTok parent company to sell TikTok so that he doesn't have to ban it. But it may be that this is more about bluster and threats against China than it is about actual policy, because we know that Trump often talks big, but there is very few details about what's actually going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Is it against the free competition in the market they believe, and also which is the foundation for the whole Western markets?
Yeah, that's one of the ironies of this entire situation, is that the American claim is that China gives its own companies an unfair advantage by investing in them, by preferentially buying their services. But in this situation now, the United States is very crudely interfering in the market to force Chinese companies out, which is far more it's a far more obvious interference in the market than anything that the Chinese government has done. Mm-hmm. But as a socialist, I would say that it is something to be admired that the Chinese government is willing to think strategically and plan and invest in new technology. And if Britain had the same attitude, then we wouldn't be relying on foreign companies to to build our 5G network. We would have our own companies to do that. It's a sign of Britain's weakness that we have in the first place to look for foreign companies, and now we're being dragged into a US trade war against those companies, but we have no homegrown alternative that we can turn to do those tasks instead.
Do you think the ordinary people in the US will buy Donald Trump's strategy against a digital company from China?
I think it's working to a certain extent. From speaking to left-wing journalists in the United States, the government is whipping up a very hysterical anti-China feeling among the population. And that does seem to be reflected in increasing xenophobia, attacks on Chinese people. That was reported even before this, with his references to the Wuhan virus and the idea that Chinese people were spreading a virus. We did see in Britain some rise in attacks on Chinese people as well, but not on the scale that we've seen in the United States. So I think the danger is that this kind of aggressive, warlike rhetoric does often work, and that he will increase the readiness of the American public to swallow some kind of military conflict with China, which appears now to be a bigger and bigger risk. Mm-hmm. So the important task for everybody who supports peace and international cooperation is to challenge Trump's rhetoric on this and to point out that there is no security threat from China.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the digital decoupling feasible in the future? Because we can see a lot of decoupling in the field of trade, and then it extends to digital, and also in the military different aspects. But let's say if digital decoupling can happen or is happening.
Well, the current world economy is obviously very interconnected. So everybody uses technology produced by different countries. And we know that Huawei, one of the problems that Huawei has had is that since the United States has banned it from using US produced components, then that has created huge problems for the company in sourcing alternatives. But if companies have to source alternatives, then they will do so. China is a huge country with the resources to be able to develop its own technological technological products and its own artificial intelligence. It's already doing that. That's the reason why the United States is so nervous. So I don't think it's impossible, but it does mean that countries like Britain, which have not invested in scientific research for a long time, which are very reliant on foreign providers, are not in a good place to suddenly replace Chinese technology with other technology. This is why Britain's decision to kick Huawei out of the 5G network is going to cost billions of pounds. It's going to delay development of the 5G network in Britain by, I think, 7 years is what the government estimated, because we do not have the systems in place to cope with a sudden decoupling from China. So it's in the interest of British business to say, well, in the long term, yeah, we might be able to develop something, but there is no advantage to us in trying to force a decoupling from China. At the moment, everybody is a loser in this scenario.
And who pay the price?
It will be ordinary people who pay the price, because if there's a trade war with China, that means that goods will become more expensive. It means that we're already seeing that the impact on phones because of the Huawei issue, but as that spreads to other sectors, it will mean that technological development in Britain is also held back. So I think that ordinary people's living standards will either fall or they will not rise as fast because of this new Cold War. And ultimately, if the trade war spills over into the arena of military conflict, then of course we're talking about a far more dangerous situation in which, we've already seen lives lost in the clashes in the Himalayas. That was on a small scale. But if there is a military confrontation between China and the United States, then that could be a disaster for the whole world.
And let's say something more general or higher about the ideology, because we know U.S. it seems they have a U-turn, and they thought because the strategy was wrong, because they thought at the beginning if they engage with China can be more open, more democracy. But now they found out China strengthened its own value and the system. So it seems it gives the U.S. government administration the excuse to attack China from different ways. So let's say can a country to do anything just because the difference of ideology, which they will claim because it will lead to many differences, they can't play on the same field?
I think this is quite an interesting aspect of the whole confrontation, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States assumed that it had won the Cold War and that socialism was no longer a threat to capitalist supremacy around the world. And the assumption with China was, as you say, that China would become like the West. Margaret Kimberley, who is an American journalist who works for an organization called Black Agenda Report, she calls the US attitude to China white supremacism extended to the arena of foreign affairs. In the 1950s, you had a row in the United States about who lost China, was the phrase. They were furious that they had not predicted the communist revolution in China. And that phrase, how did we lose China, showed that they thought of China as their property. It was not China's decision what sort of government to have. It was an American decision. So now we have Mike Pompeo talking about the threat of the Chinese Communist Party, the Marxist-Leninist regime in China, and he's reviving all of this talk that was very familiar from the first Cold War about the Soviet Union. because they've realized that China is not going to copy Western political systems. It adds to the nature of the confrontation. I think it is in many ways a confrontation between two different world ideologies. And we see that in the way that coronavirus has been handled, that China has promoted cooperation, sharing medical supplies, sharing doctors, as has Cuba, as has Vietnam. Whereas Britain and America are on the opposite end of the scale. They were the only two countries that at the World Health Assembly voted against sharing any coronavirus vaccine as common property. They're standing up for a much more aggressive and non-cooperative international model. So there is an underlying difference in the ideologies here. But as the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this week, there's no need for people to agree with one political system or the other to realize that this confrontation does nobody any favors. We should be calling for cooperation, we should be calling for mutual respect, and recognizing that, you know, China does not try to tell the United States how to run the United States, and the United States should not be telling China how to run China.
But US always take it as the leader in the world, and the Western allies, they think do that. But do you think the Western ally, including Germany, will think US still the leader in the world? But it seems that Germany, US withdraw the army from Germany, reflect some conflicts or not conflicts, or maybe the difference in their mindset.
I think that the Trump government has caused a number of dilemmas because the European countries in particular were used to looking to the United States for strategic leadership. And the Trump administration has been so chaotic in tearing up the agreement with Iran that was agreed with all of the EU countries as well. It has walked out of UNICEF. It's tried to impose this new deal on Palestine, which was not one that was supported by the EU. Walked out of the World Health Organization. In more and more different fields, the United States is going it alone and ripping up all international agreements. It walked out of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So increasingly other countries are saying, well, we can't look to the United States for leadership. It's too unpredictable. But at the same time, Britain seems to be determined to support the Trump administration in everything at the moment. And it's a priority, I think, in Britain for us to try to build pressure on our government to say, no, you can't follow a government like Trump's government because it's very reckless, it's very aggressive, and we don't know what it will do next. Mm-hmm. I think American leadership has been undermined by the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. I don't think American leadership was a good thing anyway. I think if we look at the last 20 years, we've seen the US invasion of Iraq that caused huge loss of life and destabilized the whole of the Middle East. We've seen the attack on Libya, which again, massively, you know, that country has been at war ever since. So I don't think it's a bad thing if US leadership is being challenged, because even before Trump, it was a terrible thing for the world. Mm-hmm. But I also think that it's getting weaker, and that's partly why it's getting more aggressive, because more and more countries are questioning why they should be taking orders from the United States.
Mm. The process of you mentioned the leadership because the WTO General Secretary selection process is on, but Rami, the former GD, said U.S. Always say they know what they didn't want, but they didn't tell us what they want. It's not exact quote, but the rough meaning like that. Do you agree? And for WTO candidates, what's the direction for them? I heard some of candidates, but I don't know if you have already paid attention and heard of them. Are you satisfied with the current candidates? Any candidate provide any hope for us?
Well, not really. I think that the US attitude is based on a contradiction because they want to accuse China of not playing by the rules, but they don't play by the rules themselves. They are always trying to seek an unfair advantage over other countries, and therefore that's why they can't tell us what they want, because there are no set of rules that they would abide by. But I think we need to bear in mind that all of these international institutions like the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, they were set up by the United States in a period when the United States was overwhelmingly economically dominant. And they reflect the priorities of the United States. Now, China has had to join the WTO because it's without that, it'll be shut out of the global economy. But these institutions need to be reshaped to reflect the reality that there are other powerful economic actors in the world, and the dominance of the United States and Europe in financial institutions is not sustainable forever. As other countries like China become richer and more powerful, they will rightly want more of a say in how these global institutions are run. So I think we shouldn't look at the model as a good one. It reflected the priorities of the time when it was founded, and it was dictated by the United States.
Mm-hmm. But last question about who will benefit from the chaos. We know it causes a lot of losers if it goes to the war, or maybe even for the conflicts in trade. If it goes to the war, nobody will win. But who will benefit from it, from the chaos?
Well, at the moment, we've seen that the prime beneficiaries of a hostile international situation are arms companies. And this was the story of the first Cold War as well. The big beneficiaries of the Cold War were the US military industrial complex. And we know that the United States has by far the biggest military budget in the world, more than 10 times the size. Oh, no, sorry. It's bigger than the next 10 countries put together. So those who earn their money through military spending, the big weapons manufacturers and so on, they will be very pleased at any increase in international tension. That means that countries will spend more on arms, that they will spend more on building new warships and planes and missiles and so on. So those would be the immediate beneficiaries of it. And also those unscrupulous politicians who base their careers on whipping up hatred of other countries and so on, they'll be the beneficiaries from it as well. But I can't see that anybody else benefits from this situation. I think that almost everybody is a loser.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ben. Really another inspired interview again. So my colleague, last time I sent you the article, and they wonder if they can send more to you, and you can judge if it is qualified for publishing. They will send you English version, of course. So it depends on if you need that.
That would be really helpful. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very
much.
Can you send me the link again?
Yeah, of course, for sure. All right. So have a good day and good weekend. Bye-bye.
And you. Bye.
Bye.